The silence inside the mansion was suffocating, broken only by the steady ticking of an antique clock. For 15 years, one secret had kept this house in darkness, a secret buried so deep that not even wealth or power could shield it forever. Tonight, as the heavy oak door creaked open, the past stepped inside. She had returned, the daughter he abandoned, carrying her suitcase and the storm of truth that would tear his perfect empire apart. The mansion had always stood as a symbol of power. Its marble floors gleamed under the glow of golden chandeliers, its walls lined with oil paintings that told a story of generational wealth. But for all its grandeur, the house felt empty, like a museum where time had frozen, trapping memories that no one dared to touch. For years, its master, Richard Alden, had lived here alone. He was a man feared in the business world, respected for his fortune, but despised by those who knew the cruelty he carried behind his polished smile. Richard had not expected to see her again. 15 years was enough time, he thought, to bury the past, to erase the mistakes of a single cruel decision. But the knock on the heavy oak door that evening shattered the illusion. And when he saw her, Leah, the daughter he had abandoned, standing at the threshold, suitcase in hand, he knew his empire of silence was about to collapse. Leah's presence was like a storm walking into the house. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the mansion as if every corner carried the ghosts of her childhood. She remembered the coldness of these halls, the way her cries had echoed against the marble when her father's hand first struck her, and the day he told her to leave, never to return. That memory was seared into her mind, a scar she carried long after she left. For years, Leah had built a life on her own. She worked tirelessly, moving from city to city, surviving on determination and the faint hope that she could someday confront the man who had cast her aside. She had learned the world could be merciless to someone like her, a young black woman with no family name to protect her. But she also learned how to fight, how to stand, how to endure. Now, standing in front of the man who had broken her spirit as a child, she felt the old wounds open again. The silence between them was heavier than words. Richard's jaw tightened as he tried to mask his shock with a businessman's composure. But his eyes betrayed him. There was guilt there, guilt and fear. Leah slowly stepped inside, the echo of her heels filling the hall. She placed her suitcase gently on the polished floor and looked directly at her father. For the first time in 15 years, their eyes locked. Hers carried the weight of pain and defiance. His carried the burden of a secret too dangerous ever to be spoken. The mansion, once Richard's fortress, now felt like a prison closing in on him. He could already sense the walls crumbling. He thought he had left the past behind, but now it stood before him, breathing, alive, demanding to be heard. The mansion's silence did not last long. It shattered with Leah's first words, sharp and deliberate, slicing through the air like a blade. Richard's posture stiffened, but he did not answer. He could not yet. His mind raced as he tried to decipher why she had returned and what she wanted. But Leah did not come for small talk, nor did she come for forgiveness. She had come for the truth. As the evening stretched, the tension between them thickened. Leah walked through the rooms she once knew, her fingertips brushing against the edges of furniture she remembered only too well. Each piece was precisely where it had been when she left, like time had obeyed Richard's command to remain frozen. But to Leah, every corner whispered memories of cruelty. The dining table where he struck her for refusing to stay silent. The grand staircase where she once ran down in tears only to be dragged back. The study door behind which secrets were hidden, secrets she now intended to expose. Richard tried to reclaim control. He invited her to sit, poured himself a drink, and spoke with the tone of a man who believed money could solve anything. He asked about her life, her work, and her travels. But Leah saw through it all. His words were not genuine. They were attempts to mask his unease. For years, Richard had lived a double life. To the world, he was a man of charity, a builder of businesses, a benefactor of causes. But Leah knew another side, the man who destroyed those closest to him in his obsession with perfection and legacy. She had carried those scars for too long, and now she was determined to make him face them. Leah's memories began to surface, each more vivid than the last. The night she was only 12 when he told her she was a mistake. The time he struck her in front of his colleagues, humiliating her to assert his dominance. The day she begged him to protect her mother, only to watch him turn away. Every wound came back, and her anger grew sharper with each memory. Richard, however, was not a man used to being challenged. His voice grew colder, his tone harsher. He reminded Leah of his wealth, influence, and power to destroy lives with a single decision. But Leah no longer feared him. She had built strength in the years away, born not from privilege but from survival. The confrontation escalated with every passing moment. Leah pressed him with questions he refused to answer. Why had he abandoned her? Why did he pretend she never existed? Why did he bury her name as if she were dead? Richard avoided her eyes, his silence more damning than any admission, and then the unthinkable happened. The mask cracked. In a rare moment of fury, Richard struck her once more, just as he had 15 years ago. The sound echoed through the mansion like a gunshot, shaking the walls of silence that had held for so long. But this time, Leah did not break. She did not cry, did not retreat. She stood taller, her eyes blazing with defiance. The slap was not the end of her voice. It was the beginning of it. For the first time, Richard realized that the daughter he once silenced had returned as a woman he could no longer control. The tension escalated further. Servants in the house pretended not to notice, turning their eyes away for fear of their employer. The night grew heavier, thunder rolling in the distance as if nature sensed the storm inside the mansion. Leah confronted him again, louder, stronger, demanding the truth he had buried. And deep inside, Richard knew the truth was the one weapon she could use to destroy him. The mansion had become a battlefield of silence and rage. The storm outside finally broke, lightning flashing through the tall windows, thunder shaking the walls. Leah stood at the storm's center inside, refusing to be silenced. Richard's hand still trembled from the slap he had delivered, but his daughter's unbroken stare pierced deeper than any blow. Her voice, steady yet filled with fire, echoed across the vast room. She demanded the truth, which she had carried as a shadow for all these years. Why had he denied her? Why had he hidden her existence from the world? Why had he destroyed her mother's life in the process? Richard tried to retreat into arrogance, insisting she was ungrateful and owed her survival to his wealth. Without him, she would have been nothing. But even as he spoke, his mask was crumbling. His words no longer carried authority. They reeked of desperation. Leah pressed harder, her memories colliding with the present. She spoke of the nights her mother cried alone, abandoned and discarded by the man who claimed to be honorable. She revealed how she had lived without his name, struggling for every scrap of dignity. At the same time, he dined in luxury and gave speeches about family values. Each word struck him harder than any slap ever could. Finally, Richard's facade shattered. His voice broke as he admitted the truth. He had abandoned Leah not because of her mistakes, but because of his own. In a world where his reputation meant everything, he could not bear the scandal of fathering a child with a woman society deemed unworthy. To protect his empire, he erased his daughter from existence. The confession hung heavy in the air. For a moment, even the storm outside seemed to pause. Leah's chest rose and fell with fury, her hands trembling as she clenched them at her sides. She had waited 15 years for this moment, but the truth was even more venomous than she imagined. And then came the twist. Richard revealed that Leah's exile had not been an act of abandonment alone. He had been hiding something darker. Her mother had not left willingly or disappeared into obscurity. Richard had forced her away, silencing her forever. Leah froze, her breath catching as the words cut deeper than any wound she had carried. "You were never supposed to come back," he said, his voice low, almost trembling. "Because if you did, the world would know what I did to keep my empire intact." Leah's knees nearly buckled under the weight of the revelation, but she steadied herself. The room seemed to close around her, every painting, every chandelier now a witness to his crime. The man the world admired was nothing more than a coward, a tyrant who destroyed his own blood for the sake of appearances. For the first time in his life, Richard looked powerless. His wealth, influence, carefully constructed facade, none could shield him from the storm that had returned to his doorstep. Leah had become the storm. The climax peaked as she stood tall before him, no longer the frightened child he once silenced, but a woman carrying the weight of truth. The mansion that had once broken her spirit now echoed with her strength. Richard's reign was crumbling, not from outside enemies, but from the daughter he thought he had erased. The confrontation left them both breathless. One stood drenched in guilt, the other cloaked in the fire of justice. And in that charged silence, it was clear. Nothing would ever be the same again. The storm outside began to fade, but inside the mansion, the echoes of truth still lingered like thunder refusing to die. Richard slumped into his chair, his once commanding presence reduced to a hollow shell of guilt. For decades, he had built walls of lies so high that even he believed them. But now, stripped bare before the daughter he had denied, he looked smaller than Leah had ever seen him. Leah, however, did not feel victorious. The truth was not a triumph, but a burden heavier than silence. She had come seeking answers, but answers brought wounds deeper than questions ever could. She turned away from him, eyes scanning the mansion one last time. The place that had once imprisoned her now felt like a tomb for the childhood he had stolen. Richard's voice cracked as he tried to speak, but his words carried no weight anymore. "Leah," he whispered, his tone fragile, almost pleading, but she did not answer. She had waited for him to say her name meaningfully for 15 years, and now it was too late. She walked to the doorway where the golden light from the storm's aftermath poured in. Each step echoed like a declaration of freedom. For the first time in her life, Leah felt the weight of his control lift from her shoulders. She realized she had not returned for his forgiveness, but to reclaim herself. The servants, who had watched silently for years, dared to lift their eyes now. Some looked at Leah with quiet respect, as if silently acknowledging her courage. Others looked at Richard with disgust, the image of their powerful employer forever shattered. Leah paused at the threshold, her suitcase by her side. She could hear her father's shallow breaths behind her, the sound of a man crushed under the ruins of his own empire. Part of her wanted to turn back, to ask him why he chose pride over love, why he destroyed everything for a name that now meant nothing. But she knew the answers no longer mattered. Outside, the storm had passed. The air smelled fresh, as if the world itself had been cleansed. Leah stepped into the night, her footsteps firm against the wet stone. Each one carried her further away from the mansion, further away from the man who had defined her pain, and closer to the life she was meant to live. Richard remained inside, staring at the door that had closed on him for the final time. For the first time in decades, the house felt truly empty, not because Leah had left, but because she had taken with her the last piece of humanity he had buried. His wealth, his legacy, his carefully polished name, all of it meant nothing now. As Leah disappeared into the distance, one truth became clear. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not destruction, but survival. She had survived him, survived the scars, survived the silence. And in her survival, she had taken back the power he thought he had stolen forever. The mansion, once a monument to Richard's pride, stood in the shadows of its decay. And for the first time, Richard realized that what he had lost could never be repurchased, not with money, influence, or time. Leah never looked back, and as the screen fades to black, one question lingers for every soul watching. When the people who are supposed to protect us become the ones who destroy us, do we let their cruelty define our lives, or do we rise above it and claim our own freedom?